my name is Andrew Betwain. I'm the editor of fundoperator.com, and today I am joined by Sarah Maynard, Global Head of External Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at the CFA Institute. Hello, Sarah. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Well, Sarah will be speaking in a roundtable discussion at our Fund HR Talent and Inclusion Forum in November in London on a discussion topic about invigorating constructive dialogues, strategies to discussing diversity and equality issues to create an inclusive environment. So a really broad, interesting topic there with lots to discuss, and I'm sure lots of viewpoints. So I'm going to start off with a big, broad question, Sarah. What are the benefits of constructive dialogue, and is it the most effective tool to encourage D&I and debates around subjects within it?
I'm going to give you a bit of a yes, but kind of an answer to this one. As in, yes, I agree, but the but is around the context and around the wider work, because what's the sort of situation in which you're having this conversation and how do you actually ensure it's constructive? And it really has to start with the level of trust you have on these topics within your organization. And part of that is how do you know that? How do you find out the level of trust that people have? But if you start with the idea that you've always got to be building it and reinforcing it, then part of this is saying, yes, you need a constructive dialogue, but you also need to be able to frame it in such a way that people feel safe to share their thoughts, that they've had some background reading, and so that they're not coming from a position of complete ignorance, and essentially that they know what constructive looks like. So what are the parameters? Set the scene for them, set them up to succeed, and really create that safe space and build that trust, so that then it is indeed constructive. So I would say that's the sort of starting context. And then the work from there is really where the action can start, so long as you set the scene up.
And that's an interesting point. It kind of leads on to my second question, which is kind of the reverse of that. So in your experience, what are the main causes of an atmosphere where diversity and inclusion and other topics that are around it are stifled, and that uncomfortable conversation is permeated and it can't get started? And how would you suggest ways to fix it?
So again, some of that goes to those parameters. Some of this is about accepting this is an uncomfortable space, and in a sense, if it isn't, then it probably won't achieve any kind of progress. So this, growth actually does happen at a point of discomfort, and there's some really interesting research around the way in which actually learning that is experienced through a level of discomfort and awkwardness and difficulty is the learning that sticks. And this is in a whole range of interesting contexts. So I think, first of all, somewhat embracing the discomfort. Second of all, as I say, the idea of the early research and work, and actually the pre-read, give people some materials to start with, and then also set the scene for, okay, here are some things you might want to think about. And also here's a way in which you can explore those things that you need to know more about. You can ask questions, but to do so in a thoughtful and respectful way, as indeed you would in any other professional context. So I think it's learning how to have what can feel like a personal conversation, but in a very professional way. And then that way, everyone involved has a level of safety, but can also explore that discomfort together.
It's such an interesting juxtaposition there of what you have to do. And it's kind of a bit of a segue now to my third question, which is more sort of macro, and it's about the economy that we're working in. And obviously we have a lot of people who are working remotely or they're doing hybrid working, and it's about how do we encourage these inclusive conversations when in the current economic conditions and the current working conditions, we've got low unemployment, labor shortages, the hybrid and working from home atmosphere. Have you noticed any changes to the way that these conversations are happening to reflect these changes in the economy?
Yeah, I think all sorts of changes. And certainly part of this is about indeed people taking that flexibility. But the thing about flexibility is you need to flex around certain sort of central secure points. One of those, I would say, is you do need to have some in-person meetings to anchor conversations and relationships. And I used to do work in organizational development. A lot of DEI, it really takes place in that organizational development change management space, because that's what you're trying to achieve. You want a cultural shift. That's change. So if you think about it like that, rather than sort of focus on the sort of the hot button topics, then that really helps to have a meaningful conversation where you can engage a lot more folks. But I think that if you flex around, a regular, maybe a monthly meeting, maybe fortnightly, whatever that is the cadence that suits your organization, then that gives you those relationships, the opportunity for all that non-verbal communication to happen. So I think that's one important piece. The other really important piece, and again, where the way in which DEI can really prove its value, is that it is also about examining behaviors that work and those that don't work. And where the reason that I mentioned that is because economic change and cycles are just relentless. And the chances are we are going to go from this sort of sense of very high unemployment and in this great resignation and all those anxieties about recruiting talent to a year or 18 months out, it may be looking very different. And so what I think well-established DEI practices can really give you is that ability to flex your workforce and for them to flex with you and to understand that things are going to have to keep changing. And so you're really looking all the time at those good practices, because so much of this is about good people management of both yourself and others and on your team. And so if you have that kind of culture, then you're better able to meet whatever it is that the economy throws at you. What's the next business challenge that's coming your way?
So you've mentioned there a couple of things, including the flex there in the people management you just talked about, as well as earlier creating those safe spaces to have the unsafe conversations. And this sort of permeates to my fourth and final question to you, which is, going forward, what's one thing you want everyone to do to create a more inclusive environment in the workplace?
I would say stop, look, and listen, actually. So I'm citing the kind of Green Cross code from my childhood, actually. Crossing the road safely is a good idea to stop and look at the traffic. And part of that is that, when people are fearful about what they should say in a given environment, actually one way of answering it is, are they listening? Are they getting all the cues and clues that they could be getting? And because we've all been in our sort of hermetically sealed home offices or whatever, and we've probably done less of all that interaction piece, there's probably some useful time that could go in to just learning to listen better, and listening when you are in person versus to listening, as you and I are talking now, listening at a conference, all those different skill sets just probably could do with a refresh. I think if you listen, and then the whole conversation, that embracing of that diversity piece suddenly becomes much more empowering, much more meaningful, and frankly more enjoyable, because we do also want to enjoy the work that we do together.
I mean, you had Stop, Look and Listen. I had Stop, Drop and Roll at school, which is about putting out fires. So maybe they're interconnected. I'd like to thank Sarah for her time today. It's been a fascinating insight into the broader discussions we'll have on the 17th of November at the HR Fund and Talent and Diversity and Inclusion Forum, which will be in London. And full details of that are on clearpathanalysis.com in the events section. And if you found what Sarah was saying interesting, please come and see her speak live. And thank you very much for your time, Sarah. And I'm Andrew Petwain, the editor of fundoperator.com. And thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.